Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 14th of February 2025. We have very little information coming out on what's going on the front lines in terms of hits, losses. Andrew Perpetua hasn't done his loss list for a good number of days, and so there's not an awful lot to talk about. We'll go through the basic general staff stats, some strikes, and we'll talk a bit about peace plans because that's obviously very important because there wouldn't be any hits and losses if there was a peace deal. Just because quite a lot's going on in that regard. I'll deal with it in much more detail in a geopolitics video later. So in terms of the Ukrainian general staff figures, all the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them in the description to the video below. Some fascinating stats in some of these categories. A couple of a record-breaking stat. 1,200 personnel lost is fairly average for what we're used to. It's still massively high. It's 200 above 1,000, in case you didn't know how numbers worked. That is a really big number, but definitely less than at the height of activity that was going on previously. 17 tanks is a high number there. So again, another day of high tank losses, which is fascinating. I can't wait to see Andrew Perpetua's list to see what the mix is of tanks here, and I'd be fascinated to know where they are losing these tanks. 16 troop carrying AFVs is below average, so it's interesting. You've got a couple of really high days of really high tank losses, and then troop carrying AFVs that you think would be more numerous than tanks appear to be below average. And I wonder again, like I keep asking, whether those tanks are more likely, or at least there will be a fair number of track garden sheds, as we call them, those tanks that have been converted effectively into APCs, so really they should exist in that second category, rather than tanks being used as tanks. That's my guess. 81 artillery systems is an equal high. That's matching a previous record in that category. 81 artillery systems is phenomenal. That's essentially around about 4 times the daily average. Something incredible happened yesterday, and I don't know what it was, but that is really, really, really significant. That's a sort of day that can tangibly affect the front line. If you're taking out 81, and we don't know whether A, it's 100% accurate, B, whether that is damaged or destroyed, and C, whether damaged effectively functionally equals destroyed, with the struggle that the Russians will have in fixing things like, if it's a barrel, then you can repair that, but it might mean losing that artillery piece for a couple of months or whatever. So lots of questions about that, but it could really, if they lost 81 or near enough 81, then that's really going to affect the fire support from the Russians on their troops, and that then affects their ability to take more territory. So huge number there, and then really big number in multiple launch rocket systems, losing 4 in a single day, and 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. So I don't know whether airplanes are coming into effect here. I'm seeing some footage of hammer bombs being used quite freely not freely, but there is footage of Ukrainian pilots on those salvos. It could be that the Ukrainians are producing enough of their own Bogdanas. Interesting to note that not there. Where do we have it? Here. So Ukrainian intelligence directorate shared rare footage of 155mm howitzer Bogdana in action. Ukrainian artillery continues to strike Russian invaders. Drone operators spot targets while the Bogdana crew eliminates the enemy. So it shows you at the beginning how they get the drones up in the air to do the reconnaissance and then hit stuff with Bogdanas. But I wonder if they're producing enough Bogdanas and they have enough artillery ammunition now that actually the Ukrainians might have a fairly half decent coverage or across the front lines with their own artillery, and that could be having an effect in counter battery fire and in taking out some of these vehicles. Yes, most of what we see appears to be destruction from drones, but I do wonder whether the Ukrainian production might be having an effect. 156 vehicles and fuel tanks is insanely high, and 1 piece of special equipment. So some really significant numbers in those categories. Nalcio's done an update on the Prokrosk direction. So the last time in Prokrosk, we saw, and this was on the 13th of January, we saw more Ukrainian losses than Russian losses to a fairly significant degree. And I don't know if that signified the Ukrainians trying to push back in a number of places. But yeah, having said that, it's still a sort of 3.5 to 1 ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses in the Prokrosk direction. Prior to that, it was 68 to 36, so about 2 to 1 Russian to Ukrainian losses. So the Ukrainian losses in January were pretty high. Then when we come to 10th of February figures, the Russians have added another 86 and the Ukrainians have added 63. So the Ukrainians having a better month of it. But of course, that ratio is still, I'd say, unsustainable for the Ukrainians. But it could signify that the Ukrainians are attacking. We know that in the Prokrosk area now, they are attacking in a number of places. Kotlina, Pischane, Dechenska, a load of little settlements like that. So if you want to see the details here and what makes up these losses, then you can check out the screen at the moment. But the overall figures are that the Russians are back to losing more than Ukrainians, but not by a huge margin there. Okay, what else do we have? That's actually going to come at the end. We'll talk about that at the end. So we talked about the Bogdana. There is also some footage of this helicopter, which the keen-eyed viewers have noted has a number of notches on its body there, on its nose. Mi-24B with markings of 19 Shahed drones and 6 likely reconnaissance drones, which were destroyed. So that helicopter's been responsible for taking out 25 aerial threats. We are starting to see, I saw some footage of Sea King. I don't know if it's one of the British ones that was given some time back, but we know the Germans are going to be giving 6 Sea Kings that have been upgraded to contain, to have weaponry on board. They could be used in a similar way as well to try and take out aerial threats. So helicopters becoming fairly useful in the defense of the skies there. Now, mercenaries of Wagner and other illegal armed groups fighting against Ukraine have been detained by Ukrainian and Moldovan law enforcement agencies as part of the international special operation Avengers. And these are only the first of 85 Moldovan citizens identified by operational units of the Ukrainian police who participated in the war on the side of Russia. That's not the Ukrainian police, but that's the people that they have captured. So they appear to be working hard to make sure that you don't have pro-Russian elements inside Moldova. And then what else? Oh no, that was looking through stuff. Here we go. So a powerful fire at a paint and varnish factory in St. Petersburg. Who knows whether that has anything to do with the war? It might well be that that's making ingredients for explosives or something like that. Or, I don't know, coverings for military components or whatever it might be. That could have something to do with the war or not. It could be just a careless smoker or an insurance job, etc., which is tangentially connected to the war. Okay, moving on to distant strikes. Another massive foray into Ukrainian airspace with 133 drones used by the Russians. 73 shot down, 58 were suppressed by electronic warfare, which makes 131 by my calculations, and that's a pretty good interception rate, only 2 getting through. Debris inflicted damage on Kyiv, Sumy, Chernihiv and Odessa and Kharkiv regions, as you would expect, sadly. Then we come on to something that has caused an awful lot of consternation and discussion in Ukraine and indeed outside Ukraine. So last night, a Russian high explosive combat drone hit the shelter over the nuclear reactor at Chernobyl nuclear power plant. According to President Zelensky, radiation monitoring comes back as normal so far, Ukrainian emergency services have said, but Russia is a danger to humanity. And you can see that there. Just absolutely incredible. Lots of talk about this. A Russian strike drone with high explosive warhead hits that shelter there, and it's actually caught on camera as well. As it happened, you can see the footage of it. don't know if I've got it here. At the Munich Security Conference, there's outrage over Russia's attack on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, says Andriy Yermak. He adds that Ukraine will provide the US partners with detailed information about Russia's drone strikes at the Chernobyl zone and the ongoing nuclear security threats. The engine found at the site of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant strike is identical to those installed on the Shahed kamikaze drones. And here's that footage. I wonder whether the Russians will accuse the Ukrainians of doing a false flag operation. Probably no doubt that will happen. So yeah, lots of discussion about that, as mentioned. We'll see what emerges and what international partners have to say about it. Ukrainian drones have also visited Russia. They targeted Krasnodar Krai, hitting the area near the Slovyansk Eco oil refinery. I'm not sure oil is particularly eco. Oil refinery in Slavyansk on Kuban. This refinery processes 9% of Russia's oil and has already been attacked twice in 2024. Local authorities confirmed the attack but gave no details. I don't know if that could well be fire in fields around it rather than I don't know what that tells us. But the Ukrainians have been at least somewhat busy trying to hit these hydrocarbons, the infrastructure for hydrocarbons. So Anton Gerashchenko then says, oh, no, this is more actually, the latest on the nuclear power plant strike. Russian strike on the protective sarcophagus at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is not accidental, it is symbolic. The installation of the Chernobyl new safe confinement was a unique event in the history of nuclear power safety in the world. This facility, crucial for the safety of Ukraine and Europe, was built by Ukraine together with its European partners, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, consortium of French companies, Naval. By the way, the sarcophagus was completed during Trump's presidency in his first tenure at the White House. Chernobyl confinement was impressive, has impressive size, 165 meters long, 260 meters wide, 110 meters high. It's smaller than the Statue of Liberty. The total cost of the shelter project was $2.15 billion. Protective structure over the fourth emergency power unit of Chernobyl power plant is a symbol of protection. But yeah, Tim White says an update. One more photo of the drone wreckage has just been published by Ukraine, which reportedly says it flew too low to be detected by radar. The main casing of the radioactive reactor is 100% though intact, so that's good news there. But yeah, so sorry, I got that slightly out of order. We don't have much information on what Ukraine has done overnight, other than that single strike there. Just seeing there's any more news coming from anywhere. No. So more to do with political stuff. Okay. And now to move on to those other bits and pieces. Sudan is to allow Russia to build its first naval base in Africa. This is a real kick in the teeth for those thinking, brilliant, Russia was kicked out of Syria. Tartus was one of the reasons, the main reason I would argue that they were in Syria and stopping a pipe, carbons pipe that bypasses Russia was also one of the reasons. But having lost Tartus in Syria, they are now looking at gaining a base on the Red Sea in Sudan. The naval base, which has been under discussion since 2017, would give Moscow access to the Red Sea, one of the world's most strategically important waterways. I wonder what the West's answer to that might be. A bit of a charm offensive with Sudan. Who knows? So now we're on to peace negotiations. Lots to be said about this. I'll only do it very quickly for the purpose of this video. American and Ukrainian delegations, as well as NATO Secretary General, have arrived at the Munich Security Conference. So in Germany, Munich Security Conference is taking place. Scholz has said that Ukraine war is our war. The security of Ukraine is the security of Germany. Lots of big things to be said there. Now, Sarin here says Russian and American representatives are to meet on February the 14th, so that's today, Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. To resolve, I love you guys, to resolve Ukraine war at the Munich Security Conference, said Trump. So this is causing a few eyebrows to be raised. Chairman Christoph Husgen has invited the Russians, so the Russians shouldn't be there, right? Russians will be there with our people. Ukraine is also invited. I don't know exactly who will represent which country, but high-ranking officials from Russia, Ukraine, and the United States will be there, Trump said at a press conference. Trump and his employees talking faster than thinking, making the world crazy, diplomatic dilettantes. No Russians in Munich today. At least there should be no Russians there. I don't know whether some dodgy thing might be going on behind the scenes. Well, turns out that Marco Rubio won't be there. His plane had to turn around while en route to Munich Security Conference. He was scheduled to meet the Ukrainian President Zelensky. I don't know if that is a genuine sort of mechanical issue or whether that's an excuse for not meeting Zelensky. Who knows? US Secretary of State Rubio, quote, the US will have a stake in Ukraine's long-term independence with potential partnerships for their mineral rights to help pay back taxpayers and rebuild Ukraine's infrastructure. The killing and dying must stop. That last bit's a very Trumpian statement. But I don't know about this. It sounds like, we're going to help out as long as, the long-term independence, as long as we get some payment for it. But I don't know. Zelensky-Vance meeting has been postponed. So the vice president was going to meet with Zelensky. That's been postponed due to a proposed mineral agreement that the Americans provided a rare earth mineral agreement, rare earth metal agreement, etc., with Ukraine, and they provided that to Ukraine. I would have thought it was a demand, and now the Ukrainians have provided one back to the US, and they are going to consider that, and that's apparently why Vance and Zelensky aren't going to meet yet, because they want to look that document over first. Now, this is where it gets confusing. And some people might say, if you're going to be very pro-Trump administration, pro-Trump, you're going to be saying, I told you that'd be good for Ukraine and it'll all be all right, blah, blah, blah. No, this signifies utter chaos. So a senior US official has stated that the US has not ruled out NATO membership for Ukraine or a return to its pre-2014 borders. John Cole, President Trump's former deputy Ukraine envoy, confirmed these options remain on the table despite recent comments. You've got Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, for representing the US DoD, the US government, saying very clearly at Ramstein that Ukraine will not join NATO and there will be no boots on the ground, and they will not, and it's incredibly unlikely that is unrealistic that they're going to get their borders back. And now I think you've got a kind of Project 2025 group in the administration, and you've got some serious people like Keith Kellogg and this man here, John Cole, right, and people that actually understand Russia, NATO, Ukraine, etc. And you've got Pete Hegseth saying, no, you ain't going to be in NATO. You're not going to get your borders back. And then literally 2 days later, you've got someone coming out from within the administration and walking those claims back and saying, actually, that's not off the table. Now, rather than go, I told you so, or whatever, or, the US are going to be supportive of Ukraine. The reality is that this is exactly what I said before, that you've got chaos and there's tensions between these competing entities within the US administration. You can't go and tell the world that Ukraine can't be in NATO and that they're not going to get their borders back, and then 2 days later, by the way, no, we were wrong about that. This is just really poor form. So Edward Hunter Christie said, well, according to Fox News, yesterday Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's special representative of the Middle East Affairs, a guy that was involved in getting the prisoner swap, had a 3-hour meeting with Putin during his visit to Russia discussing the war in Ukraine. Wow, what exactly they talked about for 3 hours remains unknown. Edward Hunter Christie said the part that looked bad but not completely catastrophic, Trump's formal approach through retired General Keith Kellogg was overtaken by Trump himself. So this goes back to what I was literally just saying. So Keith Kellogg and John Cole seem to be, sensible on Ukraine. And then you've got this other, Trump Hegseth Project 2025 group that is overruling the more sensible people. So Trump's formal approach through retired General Keith Kellogg was overtaken by Trump himself through the creation of an additional direct channel through Steve Witkoff. His double game blindsided America's allies and, of course, Ukraine. And that's, I think, where we're at. So Shashank Joshi then says, because if you really think that Trump is for Ukraine, then my goodness, what happened yesterday? I mean, I'm going to be talking about this at much greater length, but Trump said that Russia should be reinstated into the G7 to make it the G8 again and should never have been kicked out. Sod off, mate. Just sod off. This is Shashank Joshi being very sarcastic here for The Economist, says this is Musk negotiating. He really has Putin on the ropes. One more unprompted unilateral concession and Putin will surely crack. President Donald Trump said on Thursday that he would love to have Russia return to the Group of Seven, saying it was a mistake for Moscow to be expelled. No, it wasn't. It was absolutely 100% right. And for those saying that Obama was too weak on Russia, every person, and Republicans do this all the time, Obama was weak on Russia, Obama was weak on Russia, Obama was weak on Russia. Putin was expelled. Trump would be even weaker on Russia because he's saying even that shouldn't have happened. Trump would have been weaker on Russia than Obama in 2014. Just saying. So Konstantin, a Ukrainian here, saying, just explaining the chaos. So Pete Hegseth has said Ukraine has to make concessions to Russia. Some imaginary country may guarantee Ukraine independence, but it's not going to be the US. We will extract minerals from Ukraine. Trump has said, I love Putin. I want Russia back in the G8. Russians fought for that land. They should have it. And JD Vance says, we can bomb Russia. So JD Vance has now come out and been a little bit stronger. So he's like, come on, what is going on here? Kyiv Independent reports that Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, said in an interview with Fox News on February the 13th that formalising Ukraine's territorial losses in a potential peace deal will not equate to recognising them. In other words, if you say, right, you are not going to get these territories back, it is not to recognise them as formally Russian territories, which I think is important to state, by the way. So now we've got Pete Hegseth saying that Europe could provide... Oh, no, I don't know that this is... no, sorry, this is from the Welt. Europe could provide up to... It's not Hegseth saying this. This is EU and NATO officials saying Europe could provide up to 25,000 soldiers for deployment in Ukraine, but at least 120,000 are needed. And this is what Erland was saying yesterday. We were talking about this on a live stream. He was saying that the amount of soldiers that would be needed and for the time they'd be needed, this could be a 10, 15 year posting. This will be insanely expensive. The much cheaper option is to allow them into NATO, allow Ukraine into NATO by an absolute long shot. By a country mile, sorry. But at least 120,000 are needed, according to Welt. High-ranking military officials added that such a mission would be ineffective without the right to use heavy weaponry. And Ukraine has reportedly finalised its draft agreement on rare earth metals and handed it over to the US in Munich. The US has requested time until 5 o'clock this afternoon to review it. Ukraine has proposed to the EU to jointly extract uranium, lithium and titanium. Now here's where it gets interesting, because like I said previously, how come EU are going to be having to own this war, pay for X, Y and Z and stump up all of these security guarantee forces, and the US gets to extract all the rare earth minerals? And I think the Ukrainians have recognised the asymmetry there. So this is Prime Minister Shmyhal has said Ukraine's subsoil contains 22 out of 30 minerals listed as critical for the EU. The project of rebuilding Ukraine could become a major factor in the growth, he says, of the entire European economy and the bloc's consolidation. The EU is our conscious choice, not a temporary whim. Wow. So now we've got Ukraine potentially going, actually, we would rather Europe has the access to these minerals because we want a closer relationship. We want accession to the EU. There's, if the EU can support Ukraine in a meaningful way that would render the US less necessary, then it's going to be much more in Ukraine's interests to supply Europe with those rare earth minerals or do deals with Europe so they can form closer bonds, trading relationships with Europe and integrate into the EU. That's not what they'd be doing with the US. Now, the European Business Association has urged the Ukrainian government to declassify its information on mineral deposit data in a statement on February the 13th. So yesterday, the association argued that current restrictions hinder international agreements and discourage investment. So now we've got like these movements that seem to be towards a closer European and Ukrainian integration on rare earth metals and trade. Thank you, Ivan. And cup of tea. And that could be a little bit of a rejection there of the United States. So lots to talk about in our geopolitics video coming later. But those peace negotiations, Munich Security Conference today is going to be full of stuff to report on, no doubt. Sorry, I've filled most of this video up with peace negotiation stuff, but there is very little information coming out on what's going on the front lines. The bandwidth is being throttled by peace negotiations. Anyway, take care, guys. Speak soon, and I'll be getting straight on with recording my next video.